Picture this moment. You're standing in a London flat. The smell hits you first. Decay. Something so wrong it makes your soul recoil. The walls are covered in Celtic crosses. But as you look closer, you see something else. Slivers of dried flesh. Human skin. Smeared into the wallpaper like some satanic art project. And there, on the floor, lies what used to be a woman. Dismembered. Butchered. Her head missing. Her hands gone. Disposed of like meat. This is room 23, Royal College Street, Camden. This is where Anthony Hardy turned women into pieces. This is where the Camden Ripper was born. But here's the truth that will make your blood boil. This horror, this nightmare, this systematic butchery of innocent women, it was completely preventable. I'm about to show you how police incompetence, medical malpractice, and institutional failure created one of London's most horrific serial killers. How they had him in custody. How they let him walk free. And how that decision sentenced 2 more women to the most brutal deaths imaginable. January 2002. Royal College Street, Camden. 11:30 p.m. The call comes in as a disturbance. Neighbors complaining about shouting from flat 23. When police arrive, they find Anthony Hardy looking agitated. Suspicious. But what they find inside his flat will haunt them forever. Sally White. 38 years old. Naked. A bite mark carved into her thigh like a signature. A wound gaping on her head. Her bloodied hoodie discarded nearby like trash. The scene screams murder. Every instinct tells the officers this is wrong. This woman didn't just die. She was killed. Brutally. Violently. The bite mark alone should have been enough to arrest Hardy on the spot. But then comes the decision that damns 2 more women to death. The forensic pathologist looks at Sally White's brutalized body and concludes she died of a heart attack. Natural causes. Despite the bite mark. Despite the head wound. Despite being found naked in a killer's flat. Picture Sally's final moments. Fighting for her life. Screaming. Struggling against a monster who saw her as nothing more than prey. And then, silence. Her killer walks free because one man couldn't do his job properly. Hardy had been arrested but was released following this development. The system that was supposed to protect women from predators just handed one of the most dangerous killers in London history a free pass to kill again. On the surface, he looked ordinary. A former engineer. Educated. Well-spoken. The kind of man who blended into Camden streets without raising suspicion. But beneath that facade lived something monstrous. March 2002. Hardy is sent to St. Luke's Psychiatric Hospital in North London after a dispute with a neighbor. Even after killing Sally White, the warning signs kept flashing. His behavior was erratic, violent, dangerous. But here's where the system fails again. November 2002. Hardy is released from hospital when doctors say he is no danger to the public. No danger to the public. Those words would echo in the screams of his next victims. While Hardy was supposedly being treated, he was planning, fantasizing, preparing for his next kill. His flat walls were covered in Celtic crosses and cruciforms, with slivers of dried skin and flesh stuck and smeared to the wallpaper. This wasn't mental illness. This was ritual. This was a man who had found his calling in the systematic destruction of human life. And the authorities had just given him the freedom to perfect his craft. Within weeks of his release, Hardy was hunting again. A tramp foraging for food found human remains in a wheelie bin near Hardy's home. But these weren't just human remains. They were pieces of women. Dismembered. Butchered. Disposed of like refuse. The victims, Bridget McClennan and Elizabeth Vallet. 2 women whose trust became their death sentence. Bridget McClennan, 34 years old. A mother. Someone's daughter. A woman trying to survive on Camden's harsh streets. She made the fatal mistake of trusting Anthony Hardy. Of believing he was just another client. Instead, she walked into a chamber of horrors. Elizabeth Vallet, 29 years old. Vulnerable. Another life that mattered to someone, somewhere. Another woman who deserved protection, not predation. Another victim of a system that values paperwork over people. Police find Elizabeth Vallet's torso in Hardy's London flat. Imagine the officers' horror. Walking into that flat. Seeing what Hardy had been doing while they thought he was no danger to the public. The smell. The gore. The absolute evil that had been permitted to flourish because experts couldn't recognize a murder when it was staring them in the face. What police found in flat 23 defied comprehension. This wasn't just a crime scene. It was a workshop. A place where Anthony Hardy had perfected the art of dehumanization. Those missing body parts of 2 women murdered in his Camden Council flat have never been found, presumably buried in a refused tip, a final resting place befitting no one. Hardy had systematically dismembered his victims, removed their heads, cut off their hands, destroyed every trace of their identity, their humanity, their right to dignity in death. But the psychological horror runs deeper. Hardy earned his sinister nickname due to the gruesome methods he used to dispose of his victims, drawing comparisons to Jack the Ripper. This was methodical, calculated, the work of someone who had found pleasure in the complete destruction of human life. And it all happened because Sally White's murder was dismissed as natural causes. The Celtic crosses on the walls weren't decoration. They were part of Hardy's ritual, his way of transforming murder into something he could worship, something that fed whatever darkness lived in his soul. Every cut, every dismemberment, every disposal was performed with the precision of someone who had been given time to perfect his technique. Time the system had gifted him after letting him walk free. Police arrest Hardy at Great Ormond Street Hospital in London. Finally, after 3 murdered women, after months of freedom to kill, after a system that failed at every possible level. But even in custody, Hardy's arrogance was breathtaking. No comment, he repeatedly muttered in response to police questions. Even caught red-handed with body parts in his flat, he offered nothing. No remorse. No explanation. No acknowledgement of the lives he'd destroyed. November 2003. Hardy pleads guilty at the Old Bailey to murdering Sally White, Elizabeth Valad and Bridget McClennan. The trial was a harrowing experience for the families of the victims, who had to endure graphic details about the nature of the crimes. Imagine being Sally White's family, learning that their daughter's killer had been caught, released, and allowed to kill 2 more women because a pathologist couldn't distinguish between natural death and murder. Imagine being told that if just one person had done their job properly, your daughter would be the only victim instead of the first in a series of preventable murders. In November 2003, he was sentenced to 3 life terms for 3 murders, but police believe he may have been responsible for up to 6 more. 3 life sentences. But how many more women might be alive today if Sally White's murder had been properly investigated? How many families were destroyed because institutional failure was more comfortable than institutional accountability? Patel later came under scrutiny for this and other findings in his career. This wasn't Patel's only mistake. It was part of a pattern. A career built on shortcuts, assumptions, and deadly incompetence. But this mistake cost lives. Real lives. Women who died because one man couldn't tell the difference between a heart attack and homicide. Here's what makes this even more infuriating. The system knew it had failed. They knew Sally White's death should have been investigated as murder. They knew Hardy should never have been released. But admitting that mistake would mean acknowledging responsibility for 2 more deaths. It would mean facing the families of Elizabeth Valad and Bridget McClennan and explaining how their loved ones died because of institutional negligence. So they did what systems always do. They minimized. They deflected. They turned 3 murders into statistics and moved on. 3 women dead. Families destroyed. A community terrorized. All because professionals couldn't be bothered to do their jobs properly. But the cost goes deeper. Every woman working Camden streets after Sally White's death was at risk. Every vulnerable person in that community was endangered because the people paid to protect them chose convenience over competence. 38 years old. Someone's daughter. Someone's friend. A woman whose death should have been the end of Anthony Hardy's killing spree, not the beginning. Police found her with a bite mark on her thigh and a wound to the head. Her bloodied hoodie lay nearby. Every piece of evidence screamed murder. But Sally's voice was silenced by a pathologist who couldn't be bothered to look closely enough. She fought for her life. She left evidence. She did everything a victim could do to ensure her killer faced justice. The system failed her. 29 years old. Young enough to dream. Old enough to fear. She trusted the wrong person because the right people had already failed to protect her. Her torso found in Hardy's flat. Her identity scattered across London in pieces. Her family left to wonder how this horror was allowed to happen. 34 years old. A mother. Someone who mattered. Someone whose children waited for her to return from a nightmare that could have been prevented. Her remains found in a wheelie bin like garbage. The final insult to a life that deserved protection, not predation. This wasn't just about one bad pathologist or one missed clue. This was systemic failure at every level. Police who didn't investigate thoroughly enough. Doctors who released a dangerous patient too quickly. a pathologist who prioritized speed over accuracy. Police believe he may have been responsible for up to 6 more murders. 6 more. The Camden Ripper might have killed 6 more women while the system congratulated itself on closing cases and clearing backlogs. How many other Sally Whites have been dismissed as natural deaths? How many other dangerous men are walking free because professionals couldn't be bothered to look closely at suspicious deaths? How many families are wondering tonight why justice failed their daughters, their mothers, their sisters? Anthony Hardy is serving 3 life sentences in a British prison. He will never kill again. But the system that created him? That system is still operational, still making decisions, still choosing convenience over justice. The same culture that dismissed Sally White's murder as natural causes is still out there, still failing victims, still prioritizing bureaucracy over human life. Sally White died trying to expose her killer. Elizabeth Valid and Bridget McClennan died because that exposure was ignored. They deserve more than our sympathy. They deserve our rage. They deserve a system that values their lives enough to investigate their deaths properly. They deserve professionals who care more about truth than convenience. Most importantly, they deserve to be remembered not as statistics in a serial killer's tally, but as women whose deaths could have been prevented if just one person had done their job. The Camden Ripper wasn't born evil. He was created by a system that chose failure over accountability. A system that valued reputation over human life. A system that's still failing victims today. Anthony Hardy killed 3 women, but institutional incompetence made him a serial killer. That's the truth they don't want you to remember. That's the story they hope you'll forget. But Sally White, Elizabeth Valid, and Bridget McClennan deserve better than our forgetfulness. They deserve our commitment to ensuring this horror never happens again. This is why we investigate. This is why we remember. This is why we refuse to let the system bury its failures along with its victims. The Camden Ripper's crimes ended in 2003. The system's crimes continue today.